My friends, there's no sugarcoating the facts when it comes to the correlation between productivity and respect of bosses when it comes to how productive their employees are at work. If you have camaraderie and a sense of mutual respect, my friends over at LinkedIn say that 80% of employees work harder for bosses they respect and where they feel appreciated on the job. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, the National Bureau of Economic Research reports when you replace a bad boss with a good one, it increases each subordinate's outcome and input of productivity by more than 10%. For my friend, Victoria Pelletier, a veteran of more than 2 decades in corporate boardrooms and a champion of inclusion, she says, as executives, you can develop satisfying and productive relationships with today's workers, and it all starts with you. She's got a new book entitled The Power of Whole Human Leadership, Managing Modern Workers Towards Purpose and Profits, where she goes into these concepts in greater detail. You know, we all know that relationships are a people business, and the way that we interact with people is essentially important if we want to ensure that we maximize their level of interest, intrigue, and motivation to give us their best job and efforts as leaders. And this book will help any leader and executive transform their management style to become more empathetic and compassionate, to increase the level of desires by their employees to put out their very best. And Pelletier joined me this week to tell me more about the book, which is scheduled to be released in early September, and more about what it means to be an inclusive leader in today's modern workforce. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Victoria, if you're ready, I'm super excited to see you again, and I'm excited to talk to you about leadership this afternoon. Great to see you, my friend, and thank you once again for a few minutes.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. It's great.
Absolutely no. I know that this new book, Victoria, focuses on the modern worker and the relationship with their bosses or superiors, my friend, and it focuses on transforming business executives and other leaders into respected figures in today's business world, my friend. So I'm wondering if you can tell me all about the book and why you decided to write it.
Well, again, thank you for having me on. This book and this topic is one of the things I am most passionate about. It's definitely something in my public speaking work that I also speak on. So I finally figured that I would put pen to proverbial paper. And I say proverbial because I consume most of my content audibly now, but digitally for getting it out there, available in all formats. I I decided to write this book entitled The Power of Whole Human Leadership. And that's my phrase, but I believe that's critically important. And I'll explain that in a second. I wrote it because, quite frankly, I made some pretty big or I had some pretty big failures in my own leadership when I look at as an early leader. And I had to pivot and evolve to become a whole human leader, which has just completely transformed the relationships I have and the creation of a followership, with my teams. And for me, whole human leadership means many things, but if I were to describe it in several words, it's about being incredibly empathetic. It's about being vulnerable with our teams, which builds trust with our teams. And it's about being authentic. And I think authentic is bantied around and thrown out there too frequently, but around not being afraid to be our whole selves, around sharing some of our lived experiences with people. I'm often saying to people that one, people quit leaders, not companies for the most part. And people do business with people that they like and they trust and therefore want to do business with. I had a nickname in my mid to late 20s, I learned as the Iron Maiden. And it crushed me, Kevin, because that's not who I am. But because I became an executive at such an early age as the only woman at the time, and I was probably 20 years younger than the next nearest peer around the group, I felt like I needed to wear a bit of a mask. It's all business all the time. I'm definitely not going to show you that I'm vulnerable because I don't want to give anyone a reason to question my seat at the table. And so that's where I needed to evolve from. My nickname now is Turtle. I still have a very resilient, tough exterior shell, yet I'm still very soft, marshmallow like at times on the inside. And so that kind of leadership is what I definitely know the generations in the workforce, particularly the newer generations, are seeking in terms of those leaders and others that they work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And life and business is all about evolving and adapting, right? So it's important as a leader to know the audience you're serving and know how to authentically connect with them. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Victoria, I know this book also talked about, as you said, authentic and empathetic leadership, and really giving those who read it on the executive level the nuanced skills to better connect with the modern leader. So, let's talk about authentic and empathetic leadership and how important it is that you think leaders evolve in this regard. Tell me more.
I, a few years ago, I was talking about what I referred to then as the future of work. And the reality is the future is now. And I do think actually the pandemic helped change mindset. And it gave a voice to employees who are demanding something very different from their leaders. And it's a result of many, many things. So, I mean, obviously, the world around us has so many horrible things going on around it, but even within our workplaces, so much is evolving. Think about generative AI and how much we're having that conversation today. How is that changing the way we work? What gets left behind as we automate things? And a lot of the work that gets left behind are I hate that it's called this, but the softer skills, the human skills, the things that require creative thought and innovation and problem solving. And so again, workers are demanding something very differently. And they want to feel trusted. They want to feel supported. They want to feel that their leader has a vested interest in their success and their growth. And that's a big part of where the empathy comes in and the necessity to understand the whole human in front of us that we're leading. We can't just park our life and our weekends at the door when we walk in, or we can make our best efforts, but it will weigh heavily upon us. So as a leader, we need to understand more about those we lead, about what's important to them, about their lived experiences that contribute potentially to how they show up, and maybe what we can harness to leverage that successfully for them within the workplace. I use the word trust. I think that's critically important. I had a saying long before COVID, like before the pandemic came, that is, there are no schedules, there are just deliverables. And so I gave flexibility and the options to work remotely a long time ago before, again, the pandemic forced us into that situation. So that's the big part around sort of empathy and that whole human and how we support. And then on the authentic piece, as I said earlier, like I feel like the word's abused a little bit and it doesn't give us license to be jerks sometimes in the way we communicate. I am a big fan of radical candor, giving direct feedback, but doing it from a place of care and compassion. Authenticity also means that, as leaders, sometimes we can put our hand up and say, I don't know what I don't know. Let's figure that out together. Or I will go and find the answer or the people with the answers for you. I find too many are afraid to do that because they, again, want to feel like they've earned their seat at the table and no one should question it. It's also about being, the other word I used, vulnerable. That's a big part of it. And it's so interconnected to authenticity in our experiences, an acknowledgement of where we have our own gaps. But that's why I'm also a big proponent of diversity and inclusion, which I also talk about in the book. Complement yourself with people around who have way different work and lived and personal experiences to, create those amazing high performing teams.
Yeah, and I know one tool that you present in this book is a strategic framework to help leaders bring their whole self to work and transform them into leaders that their subordinates or superiors want to follow. So tell me about the framework and why you thought it was important to put it into the book.
Yeah, I went through each of the chapters in the book through various components. As I said, I don't it's more than being vulnerable, authentic, being transparent and empathetic. There's a lot of nuances to that. And so the framework I sort of take through everything from seeing what I refer to as the unseen employee. And that unseen employee maybe is the person who's not the loudest one at the table who goes, pick me, like, here's my experience. The person who is so extremely humble that we actually don't have sometimes an indication of all that they've accomplished and the successes we've had. Or it's about, in many cases, it is the diverse employee. Many people, when looking to hire those in their network and that they're connected to. Well, and I'll say sadly, because it does disappoint me, that in that instance, often it's people who look like them, who have the same experience as them. So the framework includes and goes through all of these steps, one of which, and my favorite, is this notion of the unseen employee. And that's where the empathy part comes in terms of how we engage with our employees to learn more about that. What is not on the resume that I need to know, that I might actually have to pull out of you and uncover to give you the opportunity to shine. And other parts of the book and the framework is, once you've identified that, I think our role as leaders is to help bridge the gap. There will be a skill gap. I like looking at not just performance, but potential. That could be the propensity to learn new skills, to handle really difficult situations. And there might be elements that they don't have enough experience with yet, or have, a gap or a shortage in that skill. That's my role as their leader, to help either coach them directly or find other resources. And so in this book, I share this framework, as you said, Kevin, but also some very specific examples. And in my own vulnerability and authenticity, I change everyone's name, so everyone's protected, but I share examples specifically of people that I've worked with over my many, many years in leadership. And in some cases, they were successes, and others, they were failures, but what I learned from them. I also want leaders or aspiring leaders who read the book to understand that, this is a journey we're on, and it's not overnight, and we're constantly improving and bettering ourselves.
Yeah, and Victoria, do you think there's a correlation between assertive and compassionate leadership? What are your thoughts there?
I think you can be both, by the way, assertive and compassionate. I feel that many leaders, and particularly those that have entered the workforce and have experienced more of a command and control type of leadership, which is certainly the workforce and the leadership I entered into, I think that they think those two need to be completely disparate. Being very assertive, very confident, delivering strong performance results, they often don't equate that with the ability to have great compassion. They see that as being too soft. And I actually think that if you have this great level of compassion and empathy for others, that builds engagement with your teams. And that in itself drives performance, which gives you the confidence to be more assertive, within the workplaces. So separate, but I actually think the two are so interconnected.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the, as you know, Victoria, I also talk to businesses about creating an inclusive workforce. And one of the things that I always tell them is that communication and genuine communications has to be accompanied with consistent action in order for your words to align with your action. So tell me how consistent action and genuine communication are interconnected in your view.
Yeah, I agree, Kevin. So I'm glad you're having those conversations with other business leaders because when I think about inclusive environments in particular, and ones in which we're talking about this kind of whole human leadership and a creation of followership, I think it's really important. I often work with leaders around their DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion programs holistically, and they focus very much on the recruitment side, bringing that diverse talent through the door, but a little less focused around creating that inclusive environment that keeps them there. And the biggest part of that is exactly what you've said, and that's you can have great policies and procedures on paper, but if the leaders, as you said, their words do not match the policies, the procedures. If we say we're committed to hiring and promoting diverse talent, but then you look at the leadership or the board members, when you look at a company website, yet they all look the same and generally not a lot of color or other diversity metrics in there, then that's a problem. And so we do need to be living with integrity and our values and commitment to those things that we are stating are our corporate values or our individual leadership values, and commitment to those greater diverse and inclusive environments.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know this book also provides a guidance on behavioral traits and practices that define the effective leaders of today. So let's talk about behavioral traits and leadership and why you decided to dive into this topic in the book.
What I'm talking about in this book, I think, your listeners and those, readers or listeners who will read the book might think some of it is relatively simple concept. And to some extent it is. You're talking about being yourself and being empathetic and building real relationships with our team members. But the reality is for many leaders, that's exceptionally difficult. Being vulnerable is uncomfortable for most. Sharing some of those deepest, darkest secrets. And by the way, I'm not suggesting we lay all of our experiences on the table. There are some that should not stay in the workplace, but certainly the relevant ones or the ones that are around who you are should come to. That's hard for many people like myself who feel like you need to appear a certain way, or even I hear many leaders say, I don't have the time. And I call BS on that. I sign a lot of my social media with two hashtags, one of which is unstoppable, but the other one related to this is no excuses. You need to make time to build these relationships, to understand your team, know more about them, understand their growth and opportunities. And then the last thing I'll say about that is incentives drive behavior. And I think at the top level of many organizations, they're incenting leaders for not necessarily the wrong things, but they're not creating a broader set of key performance indicators or KPIs or metrics that drive that inclusive culture. They're focused on growth. They're focused on profitability. They might be focused on like the customer scores, and they talk about DEI, they talk about employee engagement, but they are not holding their leader accountable through their performance incentives, their bonuses, their compensation to those pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. Victoria, I always tell the people that work with me that we make time in life for the things that we prioritize, right? That's important, isn't it?
Very much so. I agree.
Absolutely. And, we talked earlier about DE&I, but I know that it's a mutual passion for the both of us. And I'm curious to ask you about embracing it as a competitive advantage inside the walls of an organization. Tell me about the advantages that leaders can have if they embrace DE&I as a competitive advantage.
Well, I'm glad you called it a competitive advantage. I usually start with speaking about some of the facts and figures, and when setting a baseline and goals and objectives for where we're going to grow from a DEI perspective. I believe many leaders believe it's the right thing to do, yet I often hear them on the flip side talking about the costs associated with doing it without recognizing, to your point, the competitive advantage. It has been proven that more diverse and inclusive teams, they tend to have be able to assess risk much more effectively in business. They innovate and problem solve much better. And also going back to the inclusive environment, that higher sense of employee engagement drives increased productivity. That ultimately drives both our top and our bottom line. So leaders need to stop seeing this as either a tick in the box for those who are a little bit more performative or just as the right thing to do, and see it as the thing to do to drive business success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know this book also helps leaders sort of eradicate their ineffective management techniques and opportunities to increase or promote employee engagement and drive results, my friend. So let's talk about making a positive business pivot. And if you're a leader watching or listening to this, what would be your message to them about reversing their ineffective management techniques to have more positive business outcomes? What would you say then?
I would tell them it's never too late. So whether you're an aspiring leader or a brand new leader, or maybe you've been in leadership like me for decades, we're always on a journey. And as I said, it's never too late. And so for me, I actually feel fortunate that Iron Maiden nickname, I think I learned of it when I was 28 years old. And so I still have had at that point a very long runway. But whether you're 28, you're 48, you're 50, whatever age, it's not too late. But it requires what I refer to as strategic intentionality. And by that, I mean, you need to be the strategy part of it is even understanding a baseline. Have you had a 360 done? That's an assessment where usually a third party will go and collect feedback from all those around you, not just your bosses. Maybe you're performing exceptionally well delivering financial results, but your peers, your direct reports, in some cases a skip level, so the direct report to your direct reports, and gathering feedback. That's strategic. Gather a baseline of feedback and then build a plan for how you're going to address that and be intentional with every interaction you have. It's kind of like personal brand, which is one of the other things that I spend a lot of time talking about. It will evolve and change over time. And you can pivot as we evolve and change as humans. And so I would tell the leaders here to take stock, find of yourself, find some trusted individuals who can be radically candid with you, who can tell you the direct and uncomfortable things you might not want to hear, but so that you can take action. And then with each interaction you have, that's where the intention comes. And that can be things like freeing up time in your calendar to have one-on-ones with each of your team. For me, it was one of many, many things, but something that was really simple for me. I would walk into a business meeting and I'm like, launch right into the agenda. No 5 minutes, like, how was your weekend? What were you doing? Like spending time engaging with people. And so that was for me, and it was not natural. I was like, all business all the time. Let's go, 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 go. And I would just jump into it. So for me, with intention, I said, I'm going to take the first 5 minutes of the meeting just to do some idle chit chat and get to know one another and chat about the weekend or whatever it was before I launch into it. And so be strategic, be intentional, and don't be afraid to start and act now, regardless of where you are on the journey.
Yeah, just following up on that, do you think that's the key to connecting with the modern worker today? Because I know you talked earlier about seeing the unseen worker, but do you think showing a bit of concern for a personal journey of your employees or the people that work under you is a great way of connecting with the modern worker of today?
I do. Not only do I manage some of these workers, I'm a mother to two of these workers. And one of them in particular, my older one, I think of when his generation, he's 24, um, the definition of job security by, these younger generations, very different than mine or my parents. One of the ways in which they look at job security comes down to the company and the leader's investment in them. No, they don't think they're going to be there. They tend to move around every 2 or 3 years, but they see job security when they see the companies investing in their growth. And a lot of this comes down to skills assessment. I now say that the role of the HR business partner is much more of a consultant to the business leader than it used to be viewed in terms of doing like HR transactions, making sure people got paid and had benefits. It's about understanding the strategy of the business, the skills required for what we have today, and also where is our journey and where are we evolving to, and what are the skills and the desires from a career perspective of the people, and how are we going to help them get there? And so that is one of the biggest changes, but that to understand the fulsomeness of someone's skills that you don't always see purely on a resume, and their career aspirations and their propensity or desire to learn and grow, that comes with the kind of like authentic relationship and connection you need to be building with team.
Yeah, and Victoria, I'm curious to ask you, how do you think leaders can hold themselves accountable when it comes to their organizational stakeholders and measuring their own progress and creating principles that allow them to really create high performing teams? What are your thoughts there?
Well, if the organization itself isn't creating metrics, as I talked about earlier, that are much more multifaceted, that include employee metrics, then as leaders, we need to have some of those for ourselves. So for me, a big part of when I talk about career success, I've been given some other nicknames. I'm love and I'm fortunate I have the turnaround queen. I can take distressed businesses and make them perform. That comes in large part down to leadership. So yes, I can talk about profitability and growth. I hold myself accountable greatly to metrics that I absolutely can measure, and some of them are a little less tangible. So for me, the metrics I do look at, I look at diversity and I look at the progress we're making in terms of the diverse employees and the promotions, not just the attraction, the promotions within. I look at employee engagement. But what I find on the employee engagement, although those are those quarterly or annual surveys that come out, most employees do not think they're truly confidential and anonymous. So they're not always completely open, but that is one measurement. The ones that are less tangible are things that I look at. I personally, because I've been through so many mergers and acquisitions in my career, I have also moved around more like the younger generation every few years. And a way that I've measured my progress as a leader is the desire of team members who've worked with me or for me directly before who want to follow me. And even or when I post on LinkedIn on certain things, I had someone who reported to me 10 years ago who made a comment over the last couple of months about my leadership and how integral that was into her life. Those are things that are not as tangible, but there are certainly employee metrics you can and should be reporting on to hold yourself accountable as a leader.
Yeah, and to that point, how do you think, or what do you think is the key to creating a reputable reputation as a leader that is sustainable?
I think you genuinely need to want it. I used the word performative earlier, and I think or maybe even I'll borrow your words around like the language matching the action. I think there's a lot of people who talk about this being the kind of leadership, but aren't truly acting and speaking in that way. But I feel that if you truly recognize its value and its strength in delivering strong business results, and you want to be that kind of leader, then I think it's a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And Victoria, I've got two questions left for you. And the first has to do with something that just came out of the Michigan Supreme Court. As you know, I live in Windsor, which is kitty corner to the city of Detroit. And the Michigan Supreme Court just ruled 5-4 to increase the minimum wage to at least $12 an hour starting February of next year. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on not only from a management perspective, when you raise wages, yes, it does give you sort of the acknowledgement that you see the employees. But again, from the management perspective, it does create another set of circumstances in terms of opportunity and balancing opportunity versus the cost of creating the opportunity. So what I'm asking is, as a manager, when you have a change in circumstance, how important is it to create that balance, my friend?
Um, I mean, I do think it's very important. And I spent many years leading change management practices within some of the organizations I worked for. And one of the most critical elements for successful change or transition is not only planning for it. There's lots of elements around sort of project management and how you manage more formally changes in communications, but very specifically that the communication specifically down to, I'll say, individual levels, bringing it from, the very macro sort of, let's say, our C-suite all the way down. So I think it's very important. And, in my experience, I think, well, one, I've always wanted to work for organizations that provide a living wage, to our employees. And my executive career started by leading outsourcing call center organizations. Those are typically minimum wage jobs. They are unemployed, underemployed, new immigrants to the country. And the way I found to retain those employees longer, lots of turnover in those kinds of jobs, because minimum wage isn't always a living wage. So getting to that point means that I can retain people hopefully longer because they don't have to work 3 jobs. But at the same time, it's again about creating a great environment where they want to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. And Victoria, my last question has to do with legacy building as a leader and creating communities that leave a positive impact on the organizational culture and its people. So I wanted to end by asking you about legacy building and the importance of building community and how important do you think that is?
Well, maybe you and I are probably a bit biased on that. I believe it's incredibly important. I actually talk about in my earlier book, which I think when you and I spoke last time was sort of around. I was talking about personal branding, and one of the critical foundational elements is legacy and impact. And what do you want to be known for? And that ties into the conversation you asked me around leadership. And I said, I think you genuinely need to want it. And so I think it's very important. And I encourage people to think not just from a brand perspective, to think about it as a human. When I think about when I die, not that I want that to happen anytime soon, but I don't want the conversation to be about the revenue and profitability, maybe all these mergers and acquisitions I've done in business. That can be a footnote. I'd rather it be about the opportunity that I created, about how I made people feel, and that I left workplaces and communities and ideally the world at large a better place when I left it than when I came in. And so I would encourage your listeners to think about that. And that's part of that strategic intentionality. So be strategic, figure out what's that legacy and impact. What do you want to be known for? And then the intentionality is living that every day and making sure what you do, what you say is connected and directly drives towards that legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to tell you, Victoria, every time we get a chance to connect together, I always leave our conversations smarter than when I came in. And I want to wish you the best of luck with the book. And want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon. It's most appreciated, my friend. And finally, I would just ask you if people want to pre-order the book or get in touch with you personally. What's the best way they can do that?
Well, I have a website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. I'm sure that'll be in your show notes, so they don't need to figure out the spelling. So they can pre-order the book there, but it's also available for pre-order everywhere you buy physical, ebook, or audiobooks.
Well, fabulous, my friend. It's always great to see you, and thank you for your continued commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and diversifying the way we lead teams, my friend. It's always great to see you, and thank you for a few minutes.
Thanks, Kevin.